There's been this crazy video clip of Meghan giving a staffer a very dirty look, and former staffers have exclusively told me it gives me PTSD. It's classic Meghan, literally a workplace psychopath, smiling to the public on one side of her face and glowering at you on the secret side. The woman treats anyone she has power over as totally disposable. You are just treated like a tradesman who is there to fix the toilet. Hello and welcome to the Royalist podcast. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Sykes, your host. This is The Royalist, your weekly destination for royal scoops and scandals that the British media are just too scared to tell you about. Well, I'm not. I've reported on the British royal family for decades, but in 2025, I was kicked out of the international rota after the King's press secretary took exception to a story I had written in which I said that the King's cancer was incurable. You'll note that he complained on grounds of taste, not accuracy. Well, far from taking away my livelihood, as I think they hoped, I'm glad to say that the Royalist has just gone from strength to strength. We've got a Substack, we've got a YouTube, and now we have this fantastic podcast in partnership with the Daily Beast, where we'll be bringing you the real inside gossip on the world's most famous family. So, without further ado, let's get into today's royal rundown. First, in today's royal roast, I've been talking to some former staffers of Meghan who've been telling me that they got PTSD after watching a clip of Meghan caught undermining an aide on video in Australia on their recent trip to Australia. Then our royal insider this week is Vanity Fair's Katie Nicholl. And Katie will be spilling the beans on why the Queen's best friend has been shut out of her birthday celebrations by King Charles III. And finally, of course, it wouldn't be the Royalist without Tea with Tom, and I'll be joined by Paula Froelich, and we'll be getting into more Meghan and Sarah Ferguson's mysterious, some might say slightly convenient reappearance at an Austrian health clinic after several months on the lam. So, without further ado, let's get into our first segment, the Royal Roast. I don't know if you guys are, avidly on social media and the royal social media sites in the same way that I am. But there's been this crazy video clip doing the rounds of Meghan giving a staffer a very dirty look during their controversial Australian hospital visit. You'll remember they were in Australia last week. Now, the clip has gone viral, and former staffers who I spoke to have exclusively told me that it revived memories for them of their traumatic employment under her. So, in this clip, Meghan's chief of staff, who's a very, very competent professional woman called Sarah Ferguson, previously worked at the Gates Foundation, a tough cookie, I am told, is seen coming over to Harry, and she sort of taps him on the shoulder and points up at a balcony like that to indicate to him that there are people on the balcony above who want his attention. And Meghan gives her what I can only describe as a mega death stare. And you can see this clip all over X and YouTube. It gives her an extraordinary kind of death stare, arches her eyebrows at Sarah in very clear reprimand. So what was going on? Well, one source told me that Meghan's visual scolding of Fosmo was very likely down to her belief that nobody should touch either of them, but in this case, Harry, in public, except her. And of course, that is aping years of royal traditions, because traditionally the royals were seen as, a class apart. You weren't allowed to touch them. So this source told me Meghan is desperate to be seen as royal. That poor aide undermined the narrative by treating Harry like a normal person. And you can see she gets the look. So, yeah, just like royalty were treated as, special people. Touch would have implied a level of familiarity, which conflicted with its idea that the monarch was elevated or, divinely sanctioned. We're back to divine right again, chosen by God. And over time, this evolved into kind of formal etiquette. I mean, you see it with the Thai royal family, it's even more extreme. You can actually, to approach the Thai royal family, you have to crawl on your belly. Well, I'm glad to say we don't have that rules, but it's similar to things like you weren't allowed to look them in the eye, you weren't allowed to do things. And of course, these days there's a security implication to it as well. But ultimately, it's a symbolic thing of don't cross my personal boundaries. And so these royal protocols you often see when foreign visitors came to visit Queen Elizabeth, they might touch her on the back, and the Daily Mail would say there'd been a terrible breach of protocol and things like that. So it seems that that is what Meghan is clearly why she seems so annoyed at this aide for touching Harry. So another former employee told me, "It gives me PTSD." This is what they said after watching the clip. "It's classic Meghan, literally a workplace psychopath, smiling to the public on one side of her face and glowering at you on the secret side where she thinks she is unobserved. The woman treats anyone she has power over as totally disposable. You are just treated like a tradesman who is there to fix the toilet." Well, this little video vignette is doing the rounds on social media. As I said, I can confirm that it is not AI generated. The clip does slow the interaction down for effect. I did obviously go to the Sussexes, their representatives, for comment. And the Sussex team did make the point that by slowing the video down, by zooming in selectively on these kind of few seconds of what was an engagement that lasted 40 minutes or more, they claim it's designed to be manipulative and to perpetuate a false narrative. The trouble is that the narrative of Meghan being a very difficult boss isn't false. It's been reported widely by me in the Daily Beast, where I had people saying that she had psycho moments, was one of my stories. It was reported by the Hollywood Reporter, the dictator in high heels, I think was the phrase that they used. But it's most famously a matter of record written by Meghan's former PR chief, Jason Knauf, to his boss, Simon Case, who was then the kind of head of Prince William's royal household and Jason's boss. And Jason wrote this very famous letter to Simon Case that was subsequently leaked by William's office to the Times ahead of the Oprah interview in a kind of preemptive strike to discredit Meghan before the Oprah interview. Important to point out that Meghan claimed at the time that the leaking of the letter was a smear and that she had never bullied anyone. Knauf, who's communications secretary to the Sussexes and the Cambridges, sent the memo to Simon Case, and in it he raised concerns about the treatment of staff within the Sussex household. He said, "I don't know what to do. Who do I go to? Who do we report? What is there a strategy here?" It was all broken by Valentine Lowe, an old colleague of mine. Now, he was very concerned about her treatment of the staff. He alleged that 2 personal assistants had been bullied out of their jobs. He described a pattern. He said that people had been specifically targeted and undermined. One very widely cited line from the memo stated the Duchess seems intent on always having someone in her sights. Now, Meghan's, of course, denied the allegations. And I do take her side's point, right, that a 2-second clip from a 40-minute engagement is always, by its nature, going to be arguably unfair. But I am reminded of an argument that Prince Harry's barrister, David Sherborne, made in the High Court in the recent Daily Mail trial. He said that unlawful information gathering is by nature covert. So therefore, as a result, he invited the court to treat even very minor proven instances as residual shoots that proved the existence of this wider underlying practice. even though there were only fragments left to be discovered. And I would argue that you can apply exactly the same logic to this brief video clip because, yeah, sure, it's stripped of context, but detractors will say this cuts completely to Sherborne's point, which is that bad behavior towards staff is typically something that goes on in private, right? It is protected by NDAs, by fear, by social control. So so when something like this surfaces publicly, I think of course it's going to be a small aspect. Of course it's going to be partial, but I really felt like that fleeting, unguarded interaction. It's not definitive proof that Meghan is a workplace bully. It could, but it could be a glimpse consistent with a broader pattern that would match up with what I've been told over the years, what other people have been told over the years, and what Jason Knauf alleged in Black and White memo himself. So I do wonder whether Fosmo, as I said, very widely respected senior figure at the Gates Foundation. I do wonder whether she'll be willing to put up with such treatment for much longer. She's only worked for the Sussexes since December 2024, according to her LinkedIn page. But of course, these days, that makes her one of their longest serving employees. And she's got very little activity on LinkedIn, although I did notice one of her few posts is a repost of someone else talking about workplace bullying. So go figure. Well, as I said, it was interesting that last time this workplace bullying thing came up, Meghan and Harry were in Australia. And of course, they were in Australia last week. And it would be fair to say that opinions have varied about the success or otherwise of the tour. Now, the Sussex side are saying it is a fabulous success. It totally proves the validity of the half in, half out method that they always wanted and that they always lobbied for, and that now clearly they're going to go ahead and do, and to hell with what the royal family thinks. But there has been some polling come out overnight, which is absolutely brutal and very, very damaging to what the Sussexes are trying to argue. So Roy Morgan, obviously my Australian readers will know, very reputable polling company, interviewed a representative cross-section of 1,767 Australians, which is a significant sample size, aged 18 plus, about Harry and Meghan's tour. Well, the good news, first of all, 80% of them knew that Harry and Meghan were in Australia. So they're off to a good start there. 82% of the adult population were aware of the visit. So it certainly got attention, but what it did not get was approval. So of the Australians who knew about it, 81% said it had not improved their opinion of the couple. Asked whether it would improve their relationship with the king, 87% said it wouldn't. Asked whether the tour had shown them a more positive side of Meghan, 75% said no. Asked whether Harry and Meghan had been treated unfairly by the royals, which attentive listeners and viewers will remember is their core argument, and was made, I think, alluded to, shall we say, in some of the addresses about being trolled relentlessly for 10 years, about Charles not being a terribly good father and Harry wanting to be a better father. Well, only a staggering 75% said that they disagreed with the proposition that they had been treated unfairly. Look, these are not marginal numbers. If you were a politician and you had these kind of numbers, you would be completely wiped out. You would be totally obliterated. So, like, this argument that the Sussexes are bringing forward, they're saying, but everything we attended, everybody really loved them, blah, 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 it all went really well. And I think what's really interesting to think about here is, like, they are very charming people, right? If you meet them and interact with them face to face, very charming. They're, of course, right? They can work around, they can smile at you with the million watt smiles. And when you're inside the bubble, inside the motorcade, inside the select group of people that have been handpicked to meet them, that have been carefully chosen, I'm sure everything does feel wonderful. And it does feel like everybody like you. But this Roy Morgan poll, it's like, what are the other, 18 million people who weren't in the room thought of it? And it's absolutely damning. And I think what they're saying very clearly is that the tour didn't work. Like, the grievance narrative that we saw being wheeled out again didn't work. The joint commercialization of Meghan's clothing, the clothing thing with this new one-off app that I'm going to talk a bit about with Paula later, where Meghan was putting all her clothes on this new app, one off, and then selling the clothes. It didn't work. People don't like it. They don't like having their royals mixed up with like an AI app to sell them clothes. And it's interesting, of course, to note that Catherine no longer even says where her clothes are from at all because she considers it detracting to the message. You know, Harry telling a $1,000 a head summit that he hated being a royal, that it was awful, that it killed his mother. It didn't work. It didn't land. People didn't like it. They just looked like whingers. And basically, 4 in 5 Australians heard what they had and said, no, thanks, mate. We're not interested. And those are very serious findings for the couple and their team to consider, because a nationally representative poll carried out by a really respected polling company is not something that can be easily dismissed, because the numbers just are the numbers. If the Australia tour really is a blueprint for a return to the UK in July, then I would argue that the blueprint needs some serious revision, because what I'm seeing from these numbers and my perspective on how that tour went down, of mixing up the commercial with the royal, it was not a success, and people do not want to participate in or buy that product. Well, that's enough of my musings. It's time to hear from somebody else. And this week, our royal insider is Vanity Fair's Katie Nicholl. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to say that we here on The Royalist have brought you a stellar run of special guests and royal insiders. And our royal insider today is none other than a very old friend of mine who I last saw in person at my 50th birthday party, Katie Nicholl, the royal correspondent for Vanity Fair, and as of today, announced as the host of the new Royals Uncensored under the Piers Morgan Uncensored umbrella, I suppose. Would that be fair to say, Katie?
It would be fair. I am the co-host. I'm going to be hosting Royals Uncensored with Jo Elvin. She comes over from Palace Confidential. We're teaming forces and working very much under this wonderful new media platform that Piers is really getting off the ground with a huge amount of investment. We've got an amazing president in Rashida Jones, and I think she's going to do some really, really exciting things. And I think it's been a long time coming, and there is absolutely this appetite for a royal show that really takes you, behind the press releases, away from the palace spin, and really gets to the heart of the stories, which, as you know, Tom, having known me for as long as you have, is what I'm all about.
Absolutely, Katie. And a really great example of your work and your reporting in this month's Vanity Fair, this astonishing interview with Angela Kelly. You write in your story, it was the unlikeliest of friendships, the working class daughter of a Liverpool docker and a seamstress, and the most powerful woman in the world, born into her position and into a life of unimaginable privilege. For those of us who don't know, will you just paint a broad picture? Who was Angela Kelly? How did she get to know the Queen? Tell us about her job and the friendship. And tell us a bit about Angela.
So Angela was a northerner. She was brought up in Liverpool. She was the daughter of a Liverpudlian docker and a seamstress. She came from very, very working class roots. She happened to meet the Queen when she was working in Germany for the British ambassador. Prince Philip and the Queen were there to visit, and Angela, I can't remember what her exact role was, but she was working with the team there, and the Queen. At the end of it, there was a lineup, and the Queen and Prince Philip, as they always did, were shaking the hands of the staff, and I think the Queen went to ask Angela a question about the Chancellor, and Angela said, no, I can't possibly answer that. And the Queen said to her, well, of course you can. I'm the Queen of England. You can tell me anything, and I've asked you a question. And there's Philip standing by her side, sort of chuckling away, because there's this mouthy Liverpudlian who's not giving away a state secret to the Queen. But of course, I suppose that moment of candour and keeping the confidence of her employer at the time really must have impressed the Queen. And when the Queen got back to England, she sort of discreetly made some inquiries through her ladies-in-waiting about Angela Kelly, and then Angela was called for an interview to Buckingham Palace to come and join the Queen's dresser in a very sort of junior level compared to where she elevated to, and didn't have the money at the time to buy a posh frock to go for that interview. She had to sell her washing machine to be able to afford a dress to wear to Buckingham Palace. And, she just has some remarkable stories. And I think what struck me in the telling of this friendship was just how unlikely it was that the most famous, most photographed woman in the world, who was born into a life of palace and privilege and protocol and hierarchy, could have developed this incredible friendship with someone from a very different walk of life. But what struck me through speaking to Angela was that the Queen's love of Angela was largely, I think, vested in the fact that Angela was the conduit between upstairs and downstairs. I discovered that the Queen loved gossip, as we all do. Queen was no different. And Angela was her eyes and ears in the palace. And she was also her greatest protector. I mean, her reputation at the palace was AK-47.
Yes, and that nickname, of course, has gone around the world as Angela's nickname. In your piece, you talk about this relationship between being the friend, but also the protector. And I suppose that tells us a lot about her role ultimately, that she became the gatekeeper to the Queen, didn't she? And all monarchs, of course, have this final gatekeeper. And Angela was very much the final gatekeeper. And one of the really good illustrations of this is, of course, Tiara-Gate. And it's almost impossible to talk about Angela Kelly without talking about Tiara-Gate. Would you tell us her side of that story? Because we've heard it from outsiders, and we've heard it from other people, and we've heard so many different accounts of it now. What was your, and even if she couldn't talk about it directly, what was your impression of that story and of her role as the gatekeeper and the defender of the Queen and the person protecting the Queen?
Well, I think I can't speak for Angela, and what's in the piece is as far as she was willing to go on the record. But I think really the impression I got was that Meghan was largely blamed for Tiara-Gate, wasn't she, Tom? She was sort of labelled the difficult one, the one who was making demands. Whereas, in fact, my understanding from other people I spoke to as well for the piece was that actually these demands were coming from Harry, who wanted the tiara made available so that when Meghan's hairdresser came over, they could practice putting the tiara into Meghan's hair. But the problem was that these tiaras obviously are historic, prized possessions. They can't just leave the palace. There'd been an issue over which tiara Meghan was going to have. I think she liked one tiara. The provenance of that wasn't known, and therefore wasn't a tiara that she could have worn. So the Queen suggested another, which Meghan was perfectly happy with. My understanding was that she wasn't the difficult one in all of this. It was Harry. And when he couldn't get the tiara out of the palace for this trying on session, he became really difficult and really quite unpleasant about it. I was told that Angela was left in tears about the fitting which Harry demanded, and Angela just simply wasn't in a position to hand the tiara over. she apparently went to the Queen in tears, and it was the Queen who said, "Okay, this is enough. These two have been difficult enough in the run up to this wedding. Leave it to me to sort out." And I think it was the Queen who eventually intervened and explained to Harry why the tiara couldn't be made available, and why couldn't Meghan do what Catherine had done, which was, I think, to have gone to Claire's Accessories and get a cheap plastic alternative that her hairdresser was able to work with in order to do her wedding hair. So that's my understanding of Tiara-Gate. I did speak to other people who were at the palace at that time, and that all seems to match up with what everyone says. But I think it was a difficult time for Angela because, as you say, she was very much the Queen's protector, and I think that made her loved by the Queen and trusted by the Queen, but also feared. I spoke to a very senior former household member who said that Angela was revered and feared as much as she was respected, and she was incredibly loyal and devoted to the Queen. I mean, she got rid of Garrards, essentially the Queen's jewellers, of many years to bring in Harry Collins because she thought that Collins was going to do a better job and would charge the Queen less. I also interviewed the designer Stuart Harvin for the piece, and he said the same thing to me. He said that, Angela insisted on a good price for clothes for the Queen, and just because she made it very clear, just because Stuart was designing for the Queen, he wasn't going to be able to push his prices up. So she protected the Queen in many ways.
It's an extraordinary story. And of course, the bond, as you say, began with Angela taking a relatively lowly and entry-level position, but ultimately becoming her greatest friend. We know, of course, there's these famous stories about how she wore her shoes to break her shoes in, but you actually had this nice detail about how she would wear her pearls to keep
Yes.
the pearls in condition. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I didn't realise that if you've got pearls, they're best to be worn against the skin. If you don't wear them against your natural skin, then they tend to go yellow in colour. So, as well as breaking the Queen's shoes in and making sure that the shoes were always comfortable, Angela would also wear the Queen's pearls as well to make sure they wouldn't yellow. I mean, it's extraordinary when you consider these are priceless heirlooms. But then we know that the Queen would also sit at her desk reading the Racing Post, or I don't know, watching the television, wearing the imperial state crown the night before the state opening of Parliament to get used to the weight. And when her head of household would ask if she was okay and why she was doing it, she'd say, "Well, it's terribly heavy, And of course it was.
Amazing story. And of course, one of the stories that make headlines around the world out of your piece, Katie, was this recollection that Angela Kelly had of dancing to Dancing Queen with Queen Elizabeth II. An amazing image and an amazing testament to a side of the Queen that none of us saw really ever.
No, absolutely. And I was thinking back to the Platinum Jubilee celebrations and ABBA the band playing ABBA. And I mean, I love ABBA, so I was delighted. But of course, the penny then dropped that would have been the Queen's choice, because now we know that she was a huge fan of Dancing Queen. And just to know that she used to be in her dressing room and you'd have the ladies in waiting making up her bed, and Angela, who was the one to go in and draw the curtains and wake the Queen in the morning and make sure her dress was there and pressed, getting ready together and listening to the Terry Wogan show on Radio 2 and singing and dancing along to ABBA when Dancing Queen came on. And I think the point for me about the interview with Angela was, yes, it was a wonderful world exclusive. This is one of the most long-standing members of staff to the late Queen. She's not given an interview in 2 decades, so it was a huge get in that respect. And I wasn't necessarily looking for anything sensational. To me, sometimes the little details, the minutiae, that wonderful colour, just says so much about that person. And of course, we knew very little about the Queen in all of those years. She never gave an interview. We didn't know what she liked to eat, what music she liked to listen to. The very idea that she'd start singing in her dressing room is just lovely, and certainly for me lifted that veil of majesty, let that light in on the magic of monarchy. And I was just so grateful to Angela for her trust, for the time that she gave me, and that she was willing to finally break her silence and give an interview, her only interview, to mark the centenary of Queen Elizabeth.
Yes, absolutely. And Katie Nicholl, it's an amazing interview. In your piece, Angela says, "It was an honor to serve the Queen until the very end." Now, as people who follow my Substack and watch my YouTube will know, I'm really, really interested in the last days of the Queen. I think it's such an incredible story of her, being in Balmoral and the people coming and going. But what's really struck me, and especially as you say, at the time we didn't know that much about the Queen, but after her death, people I think have been a bit more forthcoming about personal stories, like this kind of thing. We're starting to get a slightly fuller picture of what she was like as a person. But one thing that's really struck me is that I was told on very good authority that Angela was there at her bedside at the Queen's death. But every story that I read just says that Princess Anne was there. And I feel that there is a bit of a effort to write Angela out of the story. We know that Charles couldn't frankly get rid of her fast enough, change the locks and all that kind of thing so that she couldn't get in. I mean, Angela was there at her death, right? I mean, she was the person she wanted by her side as she bid farewell to this world and to this extraordinary life.
She absolutely was. The Queen knew that she was, as she told one friend, headed for the departure lounge, and she knew her time had come. And one of the things Angela said to me was that she was always very accepting of that. And I think it was the case. And you're right, Tom. She was there. She was there for those final hours. There was obviously a lot of coming and going. There were doctors there. Those who were around her, Princess Royal and Angela, were as keen to make those final days and hours of the Queen's life as comfortable and as calm as possible. And I think they achieved that. And I think they largely achieved that because Angela Kelly was, well, I mean, from my understanding, was in the next door room and with the Queen really right up until the end. The other misconception, and I just want to clarify this, and I did in the article in Vanity Fair as well, was that it was widely reported that, you're right, she was moved out of her position very quickly, out of her apartment in Windsor. It wasn't a grace and favour, I'm just pointing that out, but she was moved out of Windsor very quickly, rehoused in Sheffield, which is, where her family are from, and essentially sort of put into royal exile, as it were. It was a new reign, a new regime, and new people came in, and I think there was a sense of urgency to distance Angela from the king. But to my understanding was that the royals were very good to her. They were very kind to her. It was the staff around them who were quite abrupt in Angela's departure, which for someone who'd been so loyal and dutiful to the crown must have been hard. But she was given the last honour, I suppose, of her life and her professional life, in that she did dress the Queen, and so many reports were that she didn't, and that was something I was quite keen to get to the bottom of and to clarify once and for all, because it's there in Angela's words.
She dressed the Queen for her coffin.
Funeral. Yes, she dressed the Queen
Yeah.
for her funeral, and it had been widely reported that she hadn't been given that honour, but in fact she had.
And of course, Tuesday, the 21st of April, it is the 100th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's birth today. There was due to be a fairly scaled back celebration over the course of the day. I suppose it's not entirely surprising that Angela wasn't invited to that, was it? But I mean, it would have been, I don't know. I do feel that she's been very airbrushed out of it all, to be really honest. And I think it's really unfair.
Well, when you consider that there's been a whole exhibition of her most iconic dresses, many of which were designed and collaborated on with Angela, and yet Angela's had nothing to do with that exhibition, I think that is quite extraordinary, and I think it's very sad. One of the things that I was so acutely aware of in the amazing time that I got to sit with Angela and spend time with Angela was that she is part of that connection to the late Queen, and that is a generation of which there are very few people who can still share that level of detail and insight and storytelling, which is part of history. So I think to airbrush Angela out is very, very sad. She's not a part of the 100th commemorations. And I agree with you. I think this is a centenary that feels quite pared down. One might have expected that there would have been a service, a memorial service, something to honour the Queen's life. We know that the King and Queen are going to see that exhibition of dresses. There's a garden in London that's going to be opened by Princess Anne. We know that the King's going to be giving a speech, and there's been some lovely tributes by the palace on social media, but it does feel muted. It does feel quite pared down, and one wonders if that is reflective of the period we're in, which is the focus is, of course, on Charles, not on the previous reign.
Yes. It does also strike me that the Queen didn't have many working class friends. I mean, I would hesitate to say that the Queen was a snob or anything like that. I mean, I think
Can I just say one thing? Quite the contrary, actually, because as I said to you, Tom, I did speak to other people who helped me with this piece and just gave me a lot of background colour. And actually, one of the senior members of staff who'd worked with the Queen for a very long time said that she actually loved meeting people from working class roots, and she wasn't snobbish in the slightest. She would really take an interest in people's backgrounds and stories, and she loved impersonating people. So if someone had an accent, and of course Angela did, she was, she's a Scouser. She had a Scouse accent. She still does. The Queen would take that off brilliantly, and was a wonderful mimic. But yeah, when it came to social classes, no barriers at all.
Yes, no, and in fact, that's sort of what I mean. Is that at the same time, I think it would be fair to say that most of the Queen's really trusted confidants, just because of her position, she kept a very tight circle, and so many of them were old family friends or distant relations or things like that. And in that sense, Angela is very unique in being an outsider, a working class outsider, who became literally the closest confidant of the Queen. And I mean, I'm told, for example, I'm sure you have heard this over the years as well, that during COVID, Angela was the person by the Queen's side the whole time, more or less, completely abandoned her own life to spend all her time in what was called HM bubble at the time. And I'm told that Angela was left a little bit cool by the other family members' reluctance to kind of commit to the COVID testing regime and what have you, to be able to spend a lot of time with the Queen at that difficult time when, of course, she, Prince Philip was very ill, and she obviously wasn't in the best of health. But all I mean is that it's amazing, as you say, in this incredible story in Vanity Fair, which I really urge everybody to read, of how the grandest woman in the land became best friends with this amazing working class Liverpudlian woman. It's an incredible story.
It is. It's a remarkable story. It was a beautiful friendship. They spent so much time together. I mean, Angela worked with the Queen for 3 decades. They travelled all around the world together, and they really just had the most remarkable connection, I think. And I think in many ways, Tom, you make a really good point, because Angela did give up her family. She gave up everything when she went to work for the palace. She had to, but particularly during those COVID lockdown months when Angela couldn't return to go and see her children and her grandchildren. She wasn't able to do any of that because she was there with the Queen. The Queen's hairdresser often couldn't get to Windsor. So it was Angela who had to learn how to do that famous updo and set the Queen's hair. And she said to me, she was so nervous, she needed a stiff drink at the end of it because she didn't want to get it wrong. And I think it was moments like that where the Queen put her complete trust in Angela, and Angela put her complete trust in the Queen. And I think both are women, matriarchs, strong women who at times have had to put duty before family. So despite their different backgrounds and contexts and social backgrounds, actually they had an awful lot in common.
What a fantastic point on which to end. Katie Nicholl, Vanity Fair's royal correspondent and host of the shortly coming to a YouTube screen near you, Royals Uncensored, which is part of the whole Uncensored family. Katie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure. And I wish you great continued success with your podcast too.
Now, it wouldn't be the Royalist without talking to my old friend Paula Froelich. So we're going to get into our next segment, Tea with Tom. How goest thou, my lady?
Oh, so fair, my good sir. Thank you.
Well, I am tickled pink to hear it. Some interesting developments this week in the world of Meghan Markle commercializing her entire life to flog it to us online. Of course, we had those shocking scenes in Australia last week during her visit to Australia, which we've talked about previously, where she was selling the clothes off her back while visiting the site of the Bondi massacre. But a new development this week in that Meghan seems to be selling a range of candles specifically hooked on her children. Is this correct, Paula?
Oh, absolutely. She not only is selling candles with the number, so it's 604 for June 4th or whatnot, for her children's birthdays. But here's the deal, Tom. She's also referring to them as Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, which I think is laughable because aren't they the ones who said we don't want titles for our kids and all this stuff? And then, of course, they went around the side about last year and got them titles, and now they're using their titles and specifically so they can sell merch. It's outrageous. And also coming after Harry gave a speech last week saying, I didn't want to be royal and all this stuff. I mean, take a page out of Zara and Mike Tyndall's book, have a normal life. Let your kids have a normal life. But no, they are prince and princess.
So it is really shocking, and people will know who followed my Substack and who followed me and Paula on YouTube. I find this one of the most blatant bits of hypocrisy about the Sussex operation, this commercialization of the family. And I use the word commercialization a lot when I'm talking about it because that's the word that Harry used just as recently as earlier this year when he was giving evidence in the High Court saying how awful it was that he had been commercialized without his consent, that he'd been forced to be part of this narrative of the royal family without his consent. And it's just amazing to me that he is unable to stop Meghan and as ever from merchandising and marketing their kids in this way that we must assume contravenes his standards of what he considers to be an appropriate father. And we've seen the kids being used in marketing material along with the dogs and all that kind of stuff before. But this is the most explicit example yet. So the marketing material specifically mentions, as you said, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, which seems is now a very clear violation of the Sandringham Summit Agreement of 2020 and the 2021 agreement that followed it. No great surprise there. But I did feel shocked, even though I would think that I was unshockable by now. I did feel shocked that she was specifically selling a Prince Archie candle and a Princess Lilibet candle referred to by their dates of birth. I mean, it's just so blatant now, isn't it?
Well, it's also
for sale.
creepy. Yeah, it's also creepy, Tom. It's like, is this candle going to smell like Princess Lilibet? Or this one to smell like Prince Archie? To evoke these small children? It's just creepy to me. But it is also so awful. I mean, here she is making these children into a product. And it's everything Harry claims he does not want. And it's also marketing the children out to the wider world and inviting in stalkers and nutbags to get into these children's lives so they can smell them.
I am told it is a real pressure point in the relationship, and that the whole social media thing, the whole presence of Meghan on social media is a real bone of contention between the couple. And we've seen Harry give so many public statements, in the podcast with Hassan Minhaj last year when he was talking about these evil people who are
Mm.
farming our children's minds and don't put your children on the internet, especially in the era of AI, and literally at the same time, Meghan's posting images of the kids to flog her brand and to sell her stuff. I mean, it seems like such a incredible hypocrisy from within them. It seems like they're having this public argument in on the pages of the internet.
I think it smacks to me of desperation. Desperation for cash. The entire Australia trip smacked of need for cash. It's just, I mean, the lights need to stay on in Montecito. They need $3 million a year just to pay taxes and bills. But it's a lot. It also, frankly, to me, looks like Harry has no balls. Like, he might not like it, but he can't do anything because his wife is going to do whatever the hell she wants. And it's a little bit how I felt about that entire Australia trip. Like, we don't care about an agreement with the Queen. We don't care what the King thinks. We're going to go do what we want. And by we, I mean Meghan. And Harry's just going to fall in line because that's his wife.
The idea of sort of building a brand around your family, around your personal life, around your children. I mean, Paula, you've covered, the celebrity beat for decades. I mean, how is that kind of thing of using your children? I mean, I always think of what was Beyonce's kid called Blue Ivy or something. Like, what's the kind of wave of that been, and where are we in that wave? Because it feels to me like they're totally out of sync of where the wave is. I don't see anyone else doing brands around their kids at the moment. Are they, or am I just out of touch?
No, you're not out of touch. I mean, what she's doing is very 2009. And in fact, that's a bit of her issue. She just copies people that she liked a long time ago, but that time has come and passed. And then you look at people like Jessica Alba, who was very successful with her Honest company. She never used her children. We don't know what those children really look like because she doesn't post them. People do not use their own children. If they use children in ads, they hire child actors. But it's a little beyond the pale. And again, it smacks of desperation. I mean, she needs something to hit. And frankly, I don't know if the one-off is going to hit. Again, it's nothing new. Phoebe Gates has something like it out there, but it's already successful. And it's just old news. You look at one off on Instagram and it had 14,000. After Meghan's trip, it has 28,000. That's it. Not hundreds of thousands. People are not doing this. Not to mention, if I'm going to buy a Cartier watch, I'm not doing it off of the one-off site. I'm going to Cartier.
Yeah. And I mean, you can see, of course, everybody wants to get on board with the tech boom, the AI boom. And you could see, in a sense, that One-Off, which is this new platform that Meghan's invested in, that all of her outfits from Australia were on. I mean, in a way, it's kind of genius idea. You just upload your own picture of yourself looking cool, and people can buy the stuff, and you get your 10% or your 15% or what have you. But there's very much a sense with Meghan, isn't there, of just throw a load of mud at the wall and just pray to God that something sticks. But the problem really is that nothing's really stuck yet, except bad-mouthing the royal family, has it?
No, that's the only thing they've got going for them. And it's also why, I wrote a story on my Substack this weekend that King Charles is not going to invite them this summer because he knows that they need the royal sheen back on them. They need to rub it a little bit all around. And not to mention, what's she going to do? Put her outfits up when she goes to Sandringham or in Birmingham, what to wear when meeting the king? It's absurd. And thereby marketing and merchandising the royal family. Again, what to wear when meeting your dreaded, wicked sister-in-law? It's just, come on, girl. This is just absurd. And it's all just distasteful because the way it comes off, Tom, is that it's one rule for thee and a completely other rule for me.
Yes, What to Wear for an Awkward Family Reunion by Meghan Markle. She'll nail that look, I'm sure. Tell us more about because I saw your Sandringham scoop over the weekend on your Substack, and on Paula has a great Substack called The Inside. No, it's changed. It's called
Paula Froelich Uncensored. What?
Paula Froelich, Uncensored on Substack. So Paula had this great story on there and on NewsNation, where Paula's a presenter on NewsNation, about how we've seen Harry and Meghan really lobbying really hard to be invited to Sandringham over the summer. They'd love to be invited. It would be a great opportunity for the king to hang out with his grandchildren, blah, blah, blah. And it was like so blatant and so negative, really annoyed the palace. Paula, what were the report that you were saying this weekend? What were the new details that you had on why they won't be going to Sandringham this summer?
Yeah, well, not only did they emotionally blackmail the king with his grandchildren, which, is never a good thing to do, but again, the Australia trip was so crass and flipped such the bird to the Sandringham agreement that there's no way they're going to allow them back into Sandringham, where they can then put out another thing saying a new Sandringham agreement, or do anything like that. Harry is going to Birmingham to meet with Birmingham Invictus, which of course the games are next year. And he keeps saying, I need security to bring my family. Well, I think they're going to come anyway, because the deal has always been, if you give the palace a month's notice, then they will assess the situation. And if he brings Meghan and the children, he will have security regardless. But he is not getting IPP, International Protection Order. He is not going to get his 24/7 police back, because the Labour government cannot do that. And I think they understand that Harry is so wily these days, or I'm sorry, Meghan is, that they will do what they want, put out whatever story they want, and it will look bad. And again, the king cannot have Meghan selling her clothes while being on royal grounds.
I think you're absolutely right, Paula. And I think the core issue is that they have now openly briefed the Daily Telegraph that they are effectively repudiating the Sandringham summit, the agreement that was made there in 2020, and then followed up in 2021, in which they said that they would not use their royal title. They would not combine sort of a royal presence of royal titles with commercial activities. They are now blatantly doing that. We're seeing the marketing of the Prince Archie candle and the Princess Lilibet candle. Of course, someone who's never been particularly shy about marketing their connections with the royal family is Sarah Ferguson, who was finally found this week in what's got to be one of the easiest tabloid scoops of all time. Show up at the last place Fergie had a freebie. Position your telephoto lens and sit back and wait for her to appear. She was at the Mayo Clinic in Austria all this time.
I mean, it's shocking, but not shocking. I love that she's going from one expensive clinic to another expensive clinic, and then somehow, when people don't know about her and she needs to pay the bill, wink, get some PR, a photographer magically shows up. I'm just shocked that she didn't have more makeup on.
Yes, and my friend Lauren the Insider has a great analysis of this on her YouTube channel. Lauren's a former PR woman who worked with the newspaper for a long time, knows a lot of the characters involved. It's a great story. Lauren and is claiming that this is basically a setup. She's pointing out that in Austria, you cannot take a photograph of somebody in a medical facility. She's also pointing out, which I think is a very good point, that it's very convenient for Sarah Ferguson to be photographed at a wellness clinic, at a recovery spot, to increase this narrative of, let's have some sympathy for Sarah. Maybe she's suffered enough. Maybe she's had a really hard time. So, look, I don't know if I totally buy it, but I think it certainly seems like a good place for Sarah to finally show up, doesn't it?
Yes, well, it's also very reminiscent of what the royal family is kind of doing with Andrew, right? Oh, we had to go check on him, his mental health. He's just in such a state. They're both in states. And, I'm sorry you're in a state, Fergie and Andrew, but at the same time, you put yourself there. And you also, at least with Andrew, treated people very badly along the way. So, I can't help but say I have a little schadenfreude for people laying in the bed that they made.
Yes, indeed. And the Mayo Clinic, the Mayo Life Clinic, as I believe it's now called, has of course been the beneficiary of the Sarah Ferguson PR machine in the past. £2,000 a night, about 3,000 US dollars. I'm fairly confident that Sarah Ferguson, the queen of the freebie, will not be paying the rack rate. Do you think, Paula?
I think she'll be paying $0 or £0 or €0. Whatever you want to convert it into, she ain't doing that. And people will be lucky if she leaves a tip. But it's very, God bless her. I just, enough already. I do find it ironic that the British royal family, all of them are leaning into mental health all of a sudden. When in England, I mean, obviously, Tom, you're British, but in England, people still really don't talk about mental health. No one will walk up to you like they do in the States and say, "So I just got out of my shrink." And he/she said, nobody does that in England. But I do love that the entire royal family is now like, mental health, we must seek it. By the way, by we mean the family. It's a super crisis indeed inside that palace.
It is. And we've had, of course, all the stuff about Andrew being unstable and, he's having his shotgun license taken off him, which is complete nonsense, by the way. His shotgun license was taken off him because he was moving house. And it's a completely standard procedural thing. I'm told that there is a lot of interest in a book by her. But you are skeptical about that. Would that be fair to say?
I'm actually not skeptical anymore. I am not. I have now heard from several people that she is indeed thinking about writing her tell-all memoir and really wants to get it out her side. Although the last time someone got out their side in that family, hello, Andrew at the BBC, it didn't go so well. But she definitely needs some cash. And hopefully this time, if she does it, hopefully she will save some of it and not go to Harrods or Harvey Nichols and blow it in an afternoon.
Yeah, well, no, the only reason I believe it was because I was at the London Book Fair earlier this year and it was all anybody could talk about. There were just so many rumors that Fergie had sold a book, hadn't sold a book. And also, of course, there's all these people who've given her money in the past for books that haven't, necessarily turned out, who are all sort of going, well, hang on a sec, can we get it on?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, it's like Penguin Random House with Harry and Meghan. They're like, never again, never again. However, I think if somebody was smart, paired Sarah up with a very good ghostwriter who was on the ball and took her to task, I think it would be a very interesting book indeed. She has led a very insanely interesting life.
It's an amazing story. I mean, her mother, obviously, with this background in the Irish aristocracy, which I know a bit about, because the Royalist, as you may know, lives in the Republic of Ireland, safe from the long arm of MI5. And so her
Are you?
mother, was this. Well, her her mother, Susan, who became Susan Barantes, ran off from the husband Ronald Ferguson. Was rumored. Andrew Loney says in his book that she had an affair with Prince Philip. I mean, the whole story is wild. She knew Diana before they got married. She was like friends with before they both got married into the royal family. She has seen it all. She's seen Diana's whole mental breakdown, the aftermath, the Camilla thing, the whole 9 yards. And honestly, I just think that the story she could tell would make Spare look like the teddy bear's picnic, frankly.
I agree. Not to mention she was there through Megxit. She was there after Harry and Meghan left and was witness to all the conversations. I would absolutely buy that book.
Exactly. And I know that some people say, well, she wasn't there. She'd been excluded from the family. She was in with Andrew in Royal Lodge, and her kids were still very plugged in. And her husband was, as we all know, plugged in for many years, long after he should have been, in most people's opinion. Well, with that, on these delightful treats and tidbits, I must bid Lady Paula farewell, but it will be a brief parting, because I will soon be checking out her new Substack, Paula Froelich Uncensored, to get all the latest Paula that I can handle. Paula, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a delight as always.
My pleasure every time. I will show up for you, rain or shine.
Well, thank you so much for spending some of your precious time today. It's been one of my favorite episodes so far. I just loved talking to Katie. I thought she was fantastic. What were your favorite bits? Let us know in the comments below, please. And many thanks to my guests, Katie Nicholl and Paula Froelich. Of course, Paula and I are on Substack, a subscription newsletter service. You can find us by scanning the QR codes on your screen into your phone, or just Google Paula Froelich, Tom Sykes, Substack, and I'm sure we will come up. It only remains for me to thank my amazing producer, Rachel Passer. Rachel, thank you so much, and we'll see you all again next week.